This is Battleground PA, a PennLive podcast discussing the issues that matter to Pennsylvanians and documenting the events in the Keystone State and beyond that could shape how you vote in the 2024 elections.
Okay, greetings everyone. This is Joyce Davis, and I'm PennLive's Outreach and Opinion Editor, and this is Battleground PA. And guess what? We have some new warriors on the battlefield. We have our trusted Jeffrey Lord, who comes in swinging for the Republicans and is a devotee of President Reagan as well as President Trump. We're happy to have you here, Jeffrey. Welcome.
Good to be here, as always. I'm understanding, Joyce, that there's some sort of holiday coming up on Thursday.
I don't know.
Is this
Jeffrey,
Christmas? I forget.
We'll talk about it later, but let me introduce also J.J. Abbott. Now, J.J. Abbott, people probably know his name already because he's been around a while and worked with Governor Wolf. That's how I came to know him. But did you realize that he has been named a 2024 Pennsylvania 40 under 40? So congratulations on that, JJ.
I just made it there under 40. So just
they
made
didn't
it.
Call me. I don't know why, but can't figure out. Are you
I told him you were 39 again.
Thank you. Thank you for that. But let me tell him a little bit more about JJ. He is now, having left at least the governor's office with the former governor leaving as well. He is now executive director, is that right, of Commonwealth Communications. It's on his website, it's described as a progressive center-left nonprofit that cultivates partnerships to organize political power around democratic causes. So it looks like you might be exactly polar opposite of our friend Jeffrey Lord here. Is that right? So here we are again. We're going to be discussing some very important topics today. And the first breaking news topic that we really need to discuss is what happened with the Supreme Court's ruling. Now, I'm pretty sure both of you have opposite views on what happened, but I can tell you, having talked today with some young people, there's some serious concern about, let's just say we had a bad president. Let's just say we did, the kind of power that bad president would be able to use. JJ, you're our guest. Why don't we get you started on discussing your reaction to the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, I think outside the substance of the ruling, I think it's a moment in a series of rulings that have come down recently and then over the last few years that I think are showing a fundamental change in the direction of the country as a result of the Supreme Court justices that were appointed by Donald Trump, but also that have been facilitated over years by a conservative infrastructure that recruited candidates to very specifically rule on some of these cases as they did. And so, the immunity ruling is a pretty disturbing, I think, to the idea that no one in America is above the law. But I think the handling of the ruling was also not necessarily in the best interest of the country. The delays that we saw over and over again, holding it to the very last day, even though it had clearly been decided weeks ago, and then providing further delay to whether the former president could be held accountable for his actions, I think is just not in the best interest of the country, given where we are overall. But I think I want to go back to my original point that you look at all of the rulings over the last few weeks, and also looking all the way back to Roe v. Wade and some of the other rulings they made about the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and what we're seeing is a court that is clearly relying on a much more ideological bend than we've ever seen in at least in my lifetime. And obviously I'm under 40, so not the longest view, but I think even looking further back than that, I think we're seeing an era of fundamental change. And it's not just the fact that they just ruled that the president can go unchecked for some of his behavior. They also issued the Chevron ruling, which fundamentally undermines 40 years of precedent that protected the public as consumers, as workers, as people who breathe air and drink water, and a whole series of rulings that I think the American people, judging from how they reacted from the Dobbs decision that overruled Roe v. Wade, are not particularly fond of. The approval ratings of the Supreme Court are tanking. They are fundamentally seen as not looking out in the best interest of the American public, but instead these wealthy and powerful interests that have helped them get on the court. And that's a fundamental problem for our country. If the public does not have confidence that the last line of defense in this country for justice and accountability is going to actually hold the powerful accountable, I think that's a real disservice, not just to the American people, but also to the future of our democracy.
Got it, JJ. Well, Jeffrey, I know you see it differently, so let's hear your interpretation of what's going on here with the
Well,
Supreme.
I think, and as you know, Joyce, I am not a lawyer. But as I may have said to you, when I worked for President Reagan, I wound up getting involved in 5 fights over Supreme Court nominees, which included the famous or infamous, depending on one's point of view, Robert Bork episode. And it began to teach me that the American left, from my point of view, if they can't win a battle on the field of elections and persuade people, they want a court to force whatever the issue is down their throats, whether they like it or not, which I think is exactly the wrong thing. I think the best way always to get, I don't care what the policy is, accepted, is to convince people that you are right. I thought Roe versus Wade was a terrible decision. I thought there is no constitutional right to abortion. It's just simply, you can read the Constitution all day long, you're not going to find it. What is important is, if you really believe in that, and I don't challenge for 2 seconds the passionate beliefs that some people have on this issue, then get it passed. Go to your state legislature, convince them, and get it passed, and get the governor of the moment to sign it into law. There are surely plenty of politicians around this country who, of both parties, frankly, who would support that. So I just think that you avoid all sorts of turmoil by doing things that way.
I hear you, and I will let JJ. I know JJ has some responses to this, but I will tell you, part of what you just said was a response. One of the we have interns now from high school and college, and the way they, one of them spoke about their reaction to the SCOTUS rulings, especially with the one with the president. They said, "Well, can't Congress undo this? Can't Congress now go back and pass a law that says, no, this is the limits of presidential power"? Is that possible, JJ? Because
not in the current Congress. I mean, number one, I think the Republican Party has essentially conceded that they do believe Donald Trump should have immunity from the things that he did in the Oval Office. And I do think it's a little bit hypocritical to make that point about, the power of the people and elections, when we're literally talking about a case where the president lost, and then he tried to use the levers of power to change the result of the election. He conspired with slates of electors as a candidate while in the Oval Office to get them to essentially try to override the will of the people. Second, I would also point out that while it is our system for a long time, the Electoral College, you have 5 Supreme Court justices that were appointed by Republican presidents that lost the popular vote. So this idea that this ideology has some sort of popular mandate is just not accurate to history. And lastly, of what I would say is that, first, Roe v. Wade was not about the right to abortion. It was about the fundamental right of privacy for patients to seek the care that they and their doctors thought was medically necessary. And in states like Texas and Florida and states that are even redder, there is no fundamental chance that those legislatures are going to pass laws that allow for a fair standard for seeking abortion care. In those states, at 6 weeks, with no exceptions, when fundamentally the vast majority of patients do not know whether they are pregnant or not, they have already lost their right to make that decision. And so the idea, I think, that this is somehow a reflection of public opinion or the will of the people is incredibly, I think, counter to the actual history of how these justices got there and what these cases were about. And so I think the idea in America for a lot of Americans that we are fundamentally in a period of time where we are seeing less and less freedom in how our systems operate. I think that is really a detriment to the American experience and our way of life. And so I just think there's a real disconnect between this court and both the law, but also where the American people are on a lot of these decisions. And I would just point out too, the last thing I would just say, these all six of these justices said in their confirmation hearings that the president is not above the law. They also fundamentally misled the Congress on Roe v. Wade by the vast majority of them saying that Roe v. Wade was, quote unquote, important precedent. That was a way to avoid taking a position, but essentially suggesting to both the Congress and the public that this fundamental right would be protected. And so I think there are some real issues here, and it's reflected in the fact that the Supreme Court, not because of the left, but because of their decisions, is now fundamentally at a point of being at one of its most unpopular, and that's not a great mandate for what they're doing or what Republicans are hoping they'll do in the future.
Well, Jeffrey, the issue that I was going to bring up too is I didn't really want to talk about Roe v. Wade, but it's also just a question of you do have a right to health care. You have a right to seek the care that you need. If you're dying, for example, if you're, and you have a right to go to the doctor and the doctor says you can't live unless you deal with this pregnancy. That's what I think people are arguing about. You don't have any discomfort with that. I mean, I get abortion shouldn't be birth control. I mean, I trust me, I get that. But this is something different here. This is about healthcare, right? No, you don't see it that way?
Well, I think you ease over into the abortion issue when you do that. But again, I would just emphasize, if this is such an important issue to the American people, let them vote it. Let them vote it. Take Roe v. Wade word for word and put it in legislation and have it pass the Congress and have every state legislature pass their own version of it, 50 different versions of it.
JJ, Jeffrey, I have to side with Jeffrey on this one too. Just hear me out for 1 second, because I mean, why do Americans keep electing people who don't do their will, who do this kind of thing, right? I mean,
well, I guess I fundamentally disagree with that point, because since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, Republicans have been universally rejected in competitive elections over the last few years. In Pennsylvania, actually, the will of the people has protected abortion rights because of who we elected as governor, and in 2022, who we elected to control the House of Representatives here in Pennsylvania. I think the fundamental difference is whether people in states that are incredibly red, that have no opportunity to pass such a law, that whether they deserve
their rights are being disenfranchised.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fun. And I think the last thing I would just say is that there are a lot of reasons that people seek abortion care, and some of them are incredibly emergency situations. If you have a miscarriage, something you cannot control, the most common way that a doctor needs to deal with that is through an abortion procedure, which is illegal to do in many states. And so women across states like Texas and all of these places where they banned abortion at 6 weeks with no exception are being forced to carry failed pregnancies to term. And so I guess what kind of freedom is that? And they have no option other than to go to another state. And so I guess the message to them is that if you don't like how the laws are in your state, then you got to pick up and move. And that's a very heavy thing to ask of people who just want to be able to go and get the health care that they need. But I think, to your point, this isn't just about abortion. I think this is about a court that is enacting an ideological agenda that has been laid out over decades by the people who put them on the court. I mean, that is the fundamental thing that's happening. And in the cases of some of those justices, they have been engaged in some activity that no regular politician would get away with in terms of the kinds of things, over $4 million in gifts and gratuities that Clarence Thomas has accepted from various billionaires and other groups. Like this is why there's a fundamental distrust in them, because not only are they ruling against the will of the majority of Americans, they're also doing it in a way that is very, very suspect given their behavior over the last few years.
So in other words, Justice Sotomayor should be taken off the court because she accepted free Beyonce tickets.
Is that the same as taking $4 million in gifts from billionaires and corporations?
Yeah. It's the same principle exactly. Yes.
Did the Beyonce tickets come from someone who has interests in front of the court?
Doesn't matter. They came from somebody who
it certainly matters from an ethical, moral, and potentially legal perspective
of the court.
I do think the point is we don't think it's good whoever does it, right? I mean, we really we should call on our justices to really have the proper image so that there is no question that they're independent. And unfortunately, I have to agree with JJ on this one. Unfortunately, we don't have that impression of this Supreme Court. Millions of Americans see them as biased. But let me read this to you. Let me just read it to get your reaction on this. I got interesting, almost yesterday, a most interesting letter to the editor that's probably in today. I think I scheduled it. It says, if you're a Trump supporter celebrating the Supreme Court's declaration that the president is immune from prosecution for, quote, official acts, you may want to think twice. Our president is Joe Biden, not Donald Trump. The door is now open for Biden to pursue his self-interest while ignoring the law, formerly a Trump specialty, he says. The decision says there's nothing to prevent Biden in his official capacity as chief legal enforcer from immediately incarcerating Trump and placing him in solitary confinement for the upcoming elections or for the rest of his life. According to the ruling, no justification will be necessary and no evidence of wrongdoing will be admissible in court. He has a few more comments to say, but I think you get the gist. And one of the things I asked the young people, these young voters, was, what would you do if you were now president? And if you honestly felt the nation was in danger from your opponent, and it was only you that could save the nation, what would you do? Would you use these new powers to incarcerate your opponent? What do you think, Jeffrey?
Well, I would say that before this court decision came down, Joe Biden already gave us his answer. He sent his Justice Department to imprison Donald Trump. That's why Donald Trump has a mugshot. And the whole Democratic legal apparatus, state and local, in places like New York, Georgia, Florida, etc., have gone after President Trump with exactly that objective in mind. And to some degree, they have succeeded, which, of course, opens the door, were President Trump reelected, should the Department of Justice be used exactly in the same fashion to go after former President Biden.
We live in difficult times.
I suspect there would be all kinds of hell to pay if we did that.
I hear you. JJ, let's bring you into this one.
Well, let's start with the basic facts. The director of the FBI is a Republican who was appointed by Donald Trump, Christopher Wray. Merrick Garland, who's the attorney general, is not a partisan Democrat. He first of all, there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party and that have been critical of him for not operating as quickly as they thought he should have. Second, Jack Smith, who's the special counsel in the case regarding Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the election, was most recently a prosecutor at The Hague, which is not exactly a partisan institution. And I think lastly is we know Donald Trump did this. Like, he did it out in the open. We have a audio recording of him asking the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia to find him the votes to change the election. We have dozens and dozens and dozens of pieces of evidence that show a direct effort by Trump and his campaign to overturn the elections in specific states where it would swing it in his favor, and he lost. And so I think this whole idea that that everything is a conspiracy against Donald Trump, he openly did this. He openly and like his own people from his own administration, fellow Republicans, have said this, including Bill Barr, who was his attorney general, who I think Jeffrey, is no partisan Democrat, has told the January 6th committee that he did this over and over again. His aides. This is why, as President Biden pointed out at the debate, that 40 of 44 of Donald Trump's top advisors are, including his own vice president, which is unprecedented in American history, are not supporting him in this election because they also believe that he is a grave threat to democracy. And what he did on January 6th is just the start of what he might do in the future.
Okay,
and so I think this whole idea that he's the victim here is just really hard for anyone outside of the bubble of Trump to believe.
Okay, JJ. Okay, Jeffrey, he's made a lot of points there. And come on in. I know you want to challenge it, so go right ahead. I mean, how do you back that up?
Where do I begin? Look, I've worked in Washington, D.C. for a long time, working successively for a congressman, Pennsylvania's U.S. Senator Hines, President Reagan, and in President Bush's cabinet for Jack Kemp after that. I know how the town works. It is a very establishment town. It does not like outsiders. If you challenge the way they do business there in whatever fashion, they're going to come after you. And they will, in fact, use the legal system to come after you. In this case, come after President Trump. It is a very
part of the establishment. I mean, all of these folks were in Washington.
No, I would disagree with you, Joyce.
Joyce. I lived in Washington for 20 years, and people come and people go. New administrations bring in new people. That's why I don't get this entrenched stuff, because different people are brought in by different. I mean, Trump had his folks; they were the establishment at one time. Biden has his. You know what I'm saying? That just doesn't make sense to me. I lived there, right? I worked for NPR while I was there, so I knew exactly how it works. Just doesn't make sense that there's some entrenched, some sort of a mafia going on or something, government mafia.
When all you have to do is read the back and forth between those two FBI agents, the lovebirds there, they were going to make sure that Donald Trump wasn't elected. They were going to use their offices as members of the FBI to prevent him from being elected. They weren't the only ones.
Yeah, but I'm not arguing that they're on bad apples. I'm arguing that this
that was like 9 years ago, though. I mean, like, that has nothing to do with the fact that Donald Trump engaged in a corrupt conspiracy to overturn our election, particularly in Pennsylvania. Like, he openly tried to do it. In fact, I'll just note this for the record. In Pennsylvania, his own fake electors were like, this scheme is too corrupt for us to engage in. So we are going to literally go against the campaign, and we're going to put an opt-out for us so we do not commit a crime. That is what they did in Pennsylvania. So in Wisconsin and Arizona and other states, those electors have been charged with crimes in their states. In Pennsylvania, they did not, because they specifically put in a clause that said this is only in case the Supreme Court overturns the election, because they even knew that this was potentially a criminal act. So okay, I think that I just don't. I think this is like devoid of reality.
Got it. Go ahead, Jeffrey. I mean, what is
well, there is nothing. Look, you have an election, and the way the American system works is candidate A wins or candidate B wins. Are there contentious moments in these election counting devices? Good Lord, we have had all kinds of voter fraud issues in this Commonwealth, I'm sorry to say, over the years. We have people, I don't know whether they're out of the slammer yet, but, the former Democratic congressman from Philadelphia, Michael Ozzie Myers, and went to the
which happened in the 90s. So, okay, that it did not happen in 2016. So
yes, it did. Yes, he went to prison for trying to do this in 2016, 2015, and 2014. That's a fact. And
how many
and the
votes did Donald
allegation-
Trump lose by in
the-
Pennsylvania in
the-
2020?
The allegation was that he did this and paid off a Democratic election judge to stand by the machine and go ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. You can go all the way back to 1994.
Okay, so that, let's
go
just
back
concede that that's like 1,000 votes, right? So Donald
No,
Trump loses by
let's
70
concede that there
votes,
is a
70,000
pattern of
votes.
doing this.
You're saying there's some there is not a pattern. That's the
No
thing.
court, the problem is no court has ruled that, Jeffrey, after repeated efforts, right?
Joyce, I'm talking about just in general, Pennsylvania has a pattern of doing this. All the way.
I just want to say, you're saying every single swing state has the same, all the states where Donald Trump, including Michigan, where he lost by 230,000 votes. You're saying there was widespread corruption in the election, which meant that he was valid, because you just said that candidate A wins or candidate B wins. Let's be clear. Candidate B won. It was Joe Biden. He won the election, and they went all the way up until certification on January 6th.
Let's give Jeffrey a chance. Your point is made. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The votes need to be counted honestly. We need to be assured that, I don't care whether it's presidential elections or county commissioner elections.
I will say this, just to put the pin in this one. The Secretary of State now, right, was in fact in Philadelphia accounting the votes and tried to get. He just says interference came and he refused to do it, and unfortunately, he's gotten death threats. His family's gotten death threats. I mean, it's a terrible thing that's happening now. But anyway, let's just leave this alone because we've argued this to death. I wanted you to see though that some people are looking at this and saying, well, since the Supreme Court has done this, why didn't Biden just step up and take charge and do exactly what Trump would do? Right. And that is a concern for everybody because it is unleashing forces that we all fear will destroy our democracy. All right, leave that alone. I just want to get a quick update from you guys following the debate. Now, I know the Democrats the progressives are not happy. And I think Trump people are happy, right? But the point is that we are seeing some criticism of what people say were lies that Trump told when he was there. So who wants to start? Who wants to get started on how the debate is going to impact the votes in Pennsylvania?
I'll let you go, JJ.
Well, I mean, listen, I'm going to be very blunt. It was not a great night for the president. It was not the best debate performance we've ever seen, and there's some challenges that the candidate and the campaign are going to have to tackle. That being said, I think the idea that it will fundamentally change in November is really hard for us to know right now. I mean, I think Jeffrey would agree. In modern politics, 125 days is a lot of time.
Yes.
And what we do know is that we have two candidates that are deeply unpopular. You look at in different worlds, but they are deeply unpopular. You look at the polling, you have basically two candidates that have a majority of voters who have an unfavorable opinion of them. And so that creates a very unique election. I think the reality is, though, is that particularly in the swing states, this election was always going to be close. 2016 was close. 2020 was going to be close. So it's going to come down to some fundamentals of how we run a campaign. I personally believe that as of right now, the Biden campaign is running a better campaign. They built a lot more infrastructure. They have incredibly talented Pennsylvania folks that are running their operation here. They have these offices all over the state. They're hiring hundreds of people. And so campaigns are about building momentum into the actual voting period, which we're not in yet. We're going to have two conventions that are going to show fundamental different visions for the country. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what the has to come out of the debate is that particularly, I think that really for people to understand that this election isn't just about two candidates. It's really about two different futures for America.
That's a good point. But JJ, I mean, you're not one of those. I know you're one of those progressives, right? You're not one of those calling for him to get out of the race, right? For your candidate to move on with somebody young and new and hip and all of that, right?
I think I haven't been doing this as long as Jeffrey, but I think one of the things that one of the lessons I've learned in politics is that you just don't burden yourself with things that you cannot fundamentally control. You have to stay focused on what you can control. And so I think for Democrats, progressives, and pro-democracy people from all parties and of no party. This is fundamentally about making this election a referendum on whether people want 4 more years of an unhinged and unchecked Donald Trump. And I think if the Democrats and the president can make the case, can elevate this race, so it's really about what it will mean to people, what it will mean to have a Donald Trump administration implementing a disastrous policy called Project 2025, which we won't have enough time to get to, but everybody should Google Project 2025. And while also having a Supreme Court that has just said this week that they will not hold him accountable, I think that the country, and Pennsylvania more specifically, has to have a conversation about whether that is really what we want for this country, or whether we want a decent, honest, and obviously not young anymore, as he admits, man.
Right, because he's older and wiser. Let me bring Jeffrey into this. JJ, I hear you, but Jeffrey, it's intriguing how he's now painting the race, that it's not about two people, right? It's not about two men. It's about what those two men represent.
Well, I think that's
interesting, right?
I think that's always the case, but I think politics being politics and humanity being humanity, all of this gets pushed into the personalities of, in our case, two people. And I think that's what's happened. I don't think there's anything in the slightest that's unusual about that. And I one of the things he said that I totally agree with, there's 125 days left.
Right.
Anything, absolutely anything. I mean, in our recent lifetime, we all went to bed thinking the world was at peace, and the next thing you know, Russian troops are pouring into Ukraine.
Right.
It can happen. And Joyce, you've heard me say this before. I began to learn this lesson when I was a kid and growing up in Massachusetts, and my parents were in politics. So I followed all of this sort of stuff, right? And I'm in the 7th grade in Northampton, Massachusetts. I go off to junior high school, and the morning headlines were, will President Kennedy defeat Barry Goldwater or Nelson Rockefeller as Republicans, et cetera. I got out of junior high school that day at 2:30 in the afternoon, and everybody was in tears because they just found out that President Kennedy had been assassinated.
Yes. Well, you're right.
It was awful. In other words, events, Ukraine, JFK, who knows?
Another epidemic, another COVID.
Yeah, that's right. But the epidemic's a perfect example.
I mean, in 2016, the entire world was convinced that Donald Trump would lose because of the Access Hollywood tape, and he won. And so, and that was a lot closer to Election Day than this was. And so, I think the reality is, and this is, just my personal opinion, is that there's a handful of people in the country that are going to have an influence on what the president decides to do. That's probably him, his family, and a few other people that he trusts. All the rest of us have to stay focused, I think, at really what's at stake in this election. And there is a lot at stake. And I think there's a fundamental contrast, not just between the two candidates that are on the ballot right now for president, but also between the two parties. We have important elections up and down the ballot that are fundamentally going to set the direction of the country and Pennsylvania. And so I think that there's a lot of time for the election to change and for people to organize. And but if you care about the election, it's time to get involved, and it's time to have your say and use your voice.
One of the things that I must say surprised me the other night. I'm a Newsmax TV contributor, full disclosure. So I was watching this debate on Newsmax, but as it was played through CNN. But when it was over, I immediately went to CNN to see what they had to say. And I was truly astonished that the anchors there were saying they were being flooded by calls from their Democrat contacts saying this was a disaster and all of this kind of thing. I have no idea what's going to happen. The one thing that I do know, Joyce, and as you well know, towards the end of her life, I took care of good old mom there, who around 96 she passed when she was 99, started that gentle descent into dementia. If there's anything I learned from that experience, it's irreversible. This is not like, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. The Biden people have a real problem on their hands that they can't control. I don't know what they're going to do.
He has not been diagnosed. Come on, he has not been diagnosed.
Jeffrey, you said you weren't a lawyer. I didn't know you were a doctor.
Information here. He has not been. And your mother was 99 years old, which would give Trump and Biden at least another decade
I'm just saying that's what people are saying out there.
Yeah. Well,
and if there are going to be
let's be
other
clear, the
appearances-
reason why people are saying that is because Donald Trump's allies have spent about $10 million in Pennsylvania running ads that, without any evidence, suggest that is the case. And I think more so. I think like one of the things, and this I think an example and a recent example for us is the Fetterman and Oz debate that happened in 2022. After that debate, literally almost every pundit was like, Dr. Oz crushed it. Fetterman's never going to be able to recover. Overwhelmingly, Dr. Oz lost on election day. And so I think, but the reality is that the reaction to the debate performance is legitimate in a lot of ways. And there are, a lot of it is coming from very legitimate fears about what Donald Trump would do in a second term. And so it's important that those fears are addressed head on. I think the speech that the president gave in North Carolina right afterwards, that the events that he's going to do over the next couple days and weeks are going to be really important. They just announced he's headed to Philadelphia for a convention this coming weekend. And so the president it's incumbent on him to get out there and make this race about the choice between the two futures for America.
Well, I would just say, Joyce, that in terms of Dr. Oz, let's remember that debate was October 25th, and masses of Pennsylvanians had already voted.
Well, there you go. Okay, guys, I gotta stop it right here because it's clear we can go on and on and on. There is so much to talk about, but I'm going to say we have reached some agreement, as we always do.
Is it 2028 yet?
No, we're on the same page that we don't know what's going to happen. So with that, we've done a lot of talking about what we don't know anything about. Okay. All right. Thank you, JJ. You are certainly an expert in Pennsylvania politics, and you've given us some good analysis. I especially like the looking at what these candidates stand for and the people around them, as opposed to just the candidates. And Jeffrey, you give a very good defense for President Donald Trump. So thank you both. And
Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July, everyone.
Good to be here.
We'll have you back, JJ, very soon. All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.